All right, we're going to get started this morning with our first breakout here in Memorial Hall. Ending non-public safety traffic stops. Safety through trust.
All right, good morning again, everyone. I am Mark Haase, as well as being a board member at the Minnesota Justice Research Center. I'm an assistant Ramsey County attorney and executive officer to the county attorney. And we're gonna talk today about some work we've done in Ramsey County collaboratively to reduce the use of non-public safety, we call them, or low-level equipment traffic stops. The title of our breakout is Ending Non-Public Safety Traffic Stops, Safety Through Trust. I want you to think about that, safety through trust. I'm gonna start us off and just give the background on what we did in Ramsey County, and then I'll ask our panel some questions, and then we should have plenty of time towards the end for audience questions. First, I'm gonna play a video. This is a 1-minute trailer for an 8-minute video that we have available on our website. You may know the filmmaker, Nora Shapiro. She did some fantastic work on this. We'll start by playing this.
We should be focused on violence. We should be focused on thinking about what kind of crimes don't get solved.
If we're gonna spend time and resources out trying to make our community safer, and we have time to make 100 traffic stops today, it's really just this easy. What do you want people stopping people for?
Today, 93% of our traffic stops in St. Paul are about those things that make our community members safer.
I consider this a human rights policy.
I felt that it was very classy because they didn't stop me. They sent me a letter in the mail stating that my tail light was out.
We can't go on like this with the racial disparities that we have in policing and our criminal justice system. We need to make some changes. At the end of the day, this is something that should bring us together. There's still a lot more work to do, but this is a really good start.
All right, like I said, I'm just gonna give a quick background. Our panel will talk about the why and the how and the what's next. So what happened in 2021 is our Ramsey County Attorney, John Choi, made a decision after working and discussing this with many of his partners he'll talk about, that our office would stop prosecuting felonies that were part of a non-public safety traffic stop. These have been called in the legal world pretextual. We don't use that because they're not all pretextual. They can, legitimate safety stops. And there was also, as you'll see in the slide, an exception for danger to public safety or a dangerous condition. These are the infractions that were laid out. Vehicle registration, license plate illuminations, the ones you would probably think would be considered non-public safety. The agencies within Ramsey County that implemented this policy were Roseville, Ramsey County Attorney, what I just spoke about, St. Paul Police Department, Maplewood, and St. Anthony. Roseville, and Roseville Police Chief Scheider is here with us. Roseville actually had been working on this for a while, and they implemented their own policy right before John announced his policy with other partners. John did not want to just implement a policy and not be able to report back to the public and stakeholders about whether it was working or not. So we engaged an organization, Justice Innovation Lab, and their founder and director is with us today, Fishman. He's going to talk about their work. But we engaged them to research the impact of this policy. And there's a lot more with this. This is just a quick overview. But the highlights are that these stops went down by 86% and related searches by 92% by the participating police departments. Basically, that's just saying the officers that were told or asked not to do it, did it. the non-public safety traffic stops by those departments participating decreased from 25% to 5% of all traffic stops. So what that means is, you heard in the video, Chief Henry from St. Paul mentioned this, that we wants to put the resources where they're needed. And Mayor Carter talked about this change. It's saying basically, with the limited police resources we have, instead of spending all this time on these very, very minor non-public safety things, they're shifting the resources to actual public safety stops like speeding, DUI, those types of things, reckless driving. And a really important part of this, and a reason that John will talk about why we made this shift, and he talked about it in the video, is the racial disparities in traffic stops. And black drivers in Ramsey County experienced the largest decrease in these stops per capita, down 66% the year after the change. There still is a disparity, but it went down drastically. And Justice Innovation Lab also looked at markers of changes in crime, and they didn't find any discernible effect on crime rates. John also did not want to just stop doing these types of stops, or stop, have agencies stop doing them without having some kind of alternative. Because if you're driving with one headlight and the other one goes out, then that is a public safety issue. So we worked with our Emergency Communications Center and participating police departments, and Lights On, which is a part of an organization here started in Minneapolis, microgrants, to notify drivers that they had this issue. It's not a warning, it's just a notification. They get a letter by changing how the computer-aided dispatch is done, going through a series of steps shown here visually. The person will get a letter saying that this is the issue that we saw, it was observed, and if you want to get assistance getting the issue fixed, either come to our office or we can send you one in the mail. Different agencies did it differently. And that's the gentleman in the video that was talking about getting one of those letters. And these are just some of the not completely updated, but more recent numbers on those letters going out and the Lights On vouchers going out. On our website, if you go to community initiatives, you can find all this information, the research, the letters that go out, the videos. We also want this work to spread. That's why we're grateful to be presenting here today, because this is it's not just about traffic stops, right? It's about more than that. How do we reimagine the resources we have and do them in a way that's actually going to, create long-term public safety? And again, our panelists will talk about this more. And I think with that, I'm going to go to our panelists. We've got some questions or focus for each of them. Attorney, and we've got here, you probably recognize most, if not all, the folks up here. Attorney General Keith Ellison. We've got my boss, Ramsey County Attorney John Choi, Roseville Police Chief Erica Scheider, and Jared Fishman with the Justice Innovation Lab. So A.G. Ellison has to catch a flight. He was able to stop by with us for a little bit. So I'm going to start with you, A.G. Ellison. What's the importance of this change, and what are the opportunities to expand it or move it forward?
Thanks for the question, Mark, and thank you all for being here to discuss this very critical issue. So I would argue that trust is the essential ingredient for a just and effective criminal justice system. If there's no trust, you have all kinds of problems. One of the main things we need to do is to find ways to build authentic trust. And let me just say why we don't have trust, because we often don't go there. But I just point out that for 250 years, black people were held in bondage in this country. It was perfectly legal to own a black person. If they ran away, they would be guilty of theft of themselves. It was a crime for a white person to teach a black person to read. It was a crime for a black person to read. And even these things went on for more of American history than not. And then it didn't stop in 1865. In fact, didn't stop. We had second-class citizenship right up until 1968, and some of you all might think, 68, what do you mean? Well, in 54, we have Brown versus Board of Education. 64, we have the Civil Rights Act. 65, we have the Voting Rights Act. It's not until 68 that we pass fair housing. So before that, you could say we don't rent to blacks, right up until 68. And then you had the whole period of time where we had multiple systems maintaining a system of legal white supremacy. I don't throw that term around to make anybody feel uncomfortable. It's the fact. Who can deny it? But yes, the realtors maintained racial segregation. Yes, the all kinds. The education system did, and police were used inappropriately to maintain a vertical hierarchy. And this is very damaging to the issue of trust, because police also have the stated and legal role to maintain public safety. But everybody knows that the unstated purpose was make sure that those people stay where they're supposed to stay. And it's not, I'm just talking about black history. I could go on, I could talk about the Indian Removal Act. I could talk about the Chinese Exclusion Act. I could talk for a day, I could talk at length. But the point is, so often when a person of color gets stopped, something about that history is in the back of our mind as the lights are behind us. And even if you've done nothing wrong, you don't know whether your light went out on the back of your car while you were driving or not. Some of us have been surprised. You didn't know your back light went out, but it's out. The officer may well have a perfectly legitimate legal reason to stop you, but given history, given what we know, given all we see, not just yesterday, but even today, this element of trust is not always there. So how do we rebuild the trust? Because even if you do stop me for a legitimate equipment problem, how do I know you don't let all the white folks go by? Maybe you say, well, we're only enforcing, because we know marijuana laws, blacks and whites use drugs at the same rate, and yet the prosecutions are so much higher in the black community. So we know that even when people are equally breaking laws, the law's not always equally applied. I'm here to tell you that I know so many police officers and prosecutors believe thoroughly that most of them are just trying to do their job. I'm not saying all. I'm not saying all, and how many does it take, right? And how many does it take? Think about the level of trust that Derek Chauvin destroyed by murdering George Floyd. Think about 9-year-old Judea Reynolds, who watched him be killed that way. She was 9 when it happened. One day she'll be 19, one day she'll be 29. What does she teach her children? And we also know that there were officers who came forward, testified, that's wrong, that violates our policy. So it's not like everybody's got bad intentions, but it doesn't take a ton of bad acts to amount to a suspicion-filled relationship. So this program, in my view, is an innovative, smart way to do a lot of good things. Let's talk about officer safety. Statistics show that one of the most dangerous actions a police officer can take is effecting a traffic stop. That's not a safe endeavor for the officer or for the motorist. And what if we reduce these interactions so that we're only stopping when there's a public safety reason to do so? What'll end up, and we use other things. We use the letters, because most motorists do want to fix the equipment on their car. We use speed bumps. We use those lights to say you're going too fast. All of us have driven by and seen them. We use, cameras. They're there anyway to say, hey, look, you violated some traffic law. Here's the evidence of it. And what will happen if we do this over time, and we do this in enough places, is that what will happen, we'll begin to converge. Trust gaps will begin to close. People will begin to believe, if I got stopped, maybe there's a reason, as opposed to what we've grown used to. A situation none of us created who are in this room, but all of us have to live with. And so, the truth is, communities, low-income communities, black communities, brown communities, My experience is that they can't wait to trust the police. They want to. They would love to be able to say, that woman screams in her apartment every night and I am heartsick thinking about what she's living with. I might want to call the police. But people are like, well, should I? Because are they going to help more than they hurt? I don't know. Now that's in the non-traffic situation. But the point is, people are dying to trust, to have that trust relationship. They want safe communities. People want communities where they can be partnering with law enforcement to bring true safety, because we know that, economic development comes with people feel security. You want to open an outdoor restaurant on Broadway in North Minneapolis, well, you kind of want to know that it's going to be all good for your customers, right? But if you don't have that feeling, then you might not open up that restaurant. You might not, and somebody's not going to have the job that they otherwise would have had. So economic development and economic prosperity goes hand in hand with the sense of safety and security in community, and that goes for motorists or non-motorists. So this idea of building trust is critically important. I'm gonna wrap up right here. I'm gonna stop right here. So back in 2020, and you all remember the crime rates were very high, I would submit to you that we never really looked at the psychosocial impact of COVID and how the level of stress and anxiety spiked everything, including drug use, opioid use, domestic violence, and crime all over the country. So we saw these crime rates escalate. A group of ministers on the north side of Minneapolis, where I live, said, let's call 21 days of peace. So they got the preachers, they got a range of community activists, mothers, love, a group of people. And then they reached out to somebody they really trusted, a guy named Charlie Adams, a cop, who is the inspector in the 4th Precinct. And they said, Charlie, where are the hottest spots in North Minneapolis? And then he said, here, here, and here. These church folk deployed church folk to these hot spots with lawn chairs and cell phones. And they were playing gospel music. And they just sat out there and took pictures and said, you need to know, you're doing wrong. What do you, there was this sort of element of the elder at play. And Charlie Adams, in a forum on Broadway at the church right there, Shiloh, thank you for the little helping hand, announced that the numbers had reduced in all of these places. So why do we have on the south side George Floyd, but then on the north side we have this collaborative effort that involves police and community bringing down the level of crime and violence? One, the 3rd Precinct, I'm gonna be very candid, had a bad relationship. The 4th hasn't always had a good relationship, but under Charlie's leadership, it was much better. And so that little bit of trust that we had on the 4th allowed a relationship to come about that reduced crime, probably stopped some of them preachers from doing funeral services, and probably stopped an officer from having to use or feeling that he or she had to use deadly force. And at the end of the day, we had a safer community and more people walked away alive and in one piece. Now that's better. That's better. And when you showed me, when this, going back to this project, when you tell me that we didn't have any increases in crime, I'm telling you, why don't we do this everywhere all over the state of Minnesota? Thank you. So folks, please forgive me for having to excuse myself. Definitely love this topic and appreciate this critical conversation, but unfortunately, the plane ain't gonna wait for me. So we'll see you later.
Thanks, Chief.
See you, Keith.
County Attorney Choi now is going to talk about the reasons for the change and how he did it.
Well, thank you, Mark. And I think as we think about justice transformation, I think one of the things that's so critical is this notion that we have to change people's hearts and minds. And this is a story, actually, for me, of my heart and my mind changing over time. When I've been in this space as a leader of a prosecution office as the St. Paul City Attorney starting in 2006, and then I became the county attorney in 2010. I am not the prosecutor that I once was. The way that I would look at this issue is that if police want to utilize what is legal, and the Supreme Court in this country has said that these types of traffic stops are completely legal, that you can use as a reason to stop somebody as long as you could see an equipment violation, and with that you can do a further investigation. The Supreme Court voted 9-0 that that's completely legal. But as we think about the things that we inherit, now, you know, this whole tactic, when police officers come to work every day, when prosecutors come to work every day, they're just told that this is the way that we get to public safety, right? And as the chief prosecutor of Ramsey County, I've had a number of transformative things that have happened to my community. Starting in 2016, in the killing of Philando Castile. You know, Philando was pulled over on a non-public safety traffic stop. The reason that was articulated by that officer was because he felt like he might be the person who robbed or burglarized a store in the vicinity a few days prior, and he said that he saw a man that resembled that picture that he had seen. But clearly there was no legal justification to pull him over. So he used the non-public safety traffic stop as a reason to have that interaction. Of course, we all know what happened after that. It's one of the worst things that has ever happened in Ramsey County. And that got me to start thinking about these types of stops and whether or not they're actually effective, and listening to community about the impact that it has and the massive racial disparity. In fact, in Ramsey County, black motorists were subject to being pulled over 4 times more than white motorists and subject to being searched 9 times more than a white motorist. And this whole notion of this driving while black is a real thing. And as we look at the research, and if you just do a search of non-public safety traffic stop or pretextual traffic stop, you will see research over and over and over again about the fact that these types of stops are not that effective. In fact, the hit rate or the yield rate is no more than about 2%. In fact, in Ramsey County, after we did the study that Jared did, it was in fact less than 2%. So I think that we as a society and a community have been thinking too much about that 2% and not thinking about what the 98% is feeling and what we're doing to trust in policing and legitimacy. And so I've had this great privilege of being able to work with prosecutors around the country, and I remember I was at a convening in New York, and we heard a presentation about these traffic stops, how they were ineffective, that the hit rate was like 2%, that it's deteriorating trust in our communities, and it was a wonderful presentation. And then we went around the room and we asked all the prosecutors, the elected prosecutors in the room from major jurisdictions, about whether anybody wished to go back to their communities and implement this change with their police chiefs. Nobody in the room said that they would do that. In fact, I said maybe, and I had a big gulp, because I knew that this would be hard. But I went back in 2019, started talking to the leaders, law enforcement leaders in my community, and engaging in that conversation about, is this really the path that we want to go? Is this really effective? Is this actually enhancing or delivering the level of public safety that we really want? Because if you think about it, if you do a basketball analogy, if you're shooting 2%, the coach is probably going to say, maybe you should try another sport, right? And then another tragedy occurred in our community. We had the murder of George Floyd. And from there, and some media stories that showed the disparity in traffic stops, and just having good relationships and great partners like Chief Scheider. And actually, Chief Scheider was actually the first police chief in the state of Minnesota to enact this change in July of 2021. We enacted this change in September of 2021 with the St. Paul Police Department and the Maplewood Police Department, Roseville, and St. Anthony. But it was a long conversation, a lot of trust building, thinking about this and knowing that this would be hard. In fact, this is the most controversial thing that I have done as the county attorney. But I think as we've had this conversation, and we talked a little bit about it in the previous panel about grace, we didn't come at this saying that we're right and everybody else is wrong. We came at this saying that we wanted to show the data, we wanted to research this and meet our community where we're at. And we wanted to build out that alternative that Mark talked about. And I'll let Chief Scheider talk about some of the positives that have resulted from developing out that alternative. But I'm absolutely convinced that we are developing a better version of policing in Ramsey County, a better version of justice. And you can never have a better version of justice unless you're including everybody in our community. And we're doing that. And we're meeting people where they're at, the people that are skeptical, and showing the data, showing the research, and just continuing to have conversation. And I've always said that if this doesn't work, or if we're actually breeding more distrust, or we're actually creating less public safety, we'll stop doing it. But the truth is that we're actually, I think, developing a better version of safety, and we've got the numbers to prove it. So it's been my honor and privilege to be able to be a part of this change, but truly, it was a collaboration. Working together with law enforcement leaders in our community, working together with our community, working together and finding innovative solutions to build out an alternative so that we actually can help people fix the defective equipment violations. So I'll stop there and let Chief Scheider go next.
Great, thanks, John. Chief Scheider's going to talk about the law enforcement perspective, how she's able to get buy-in from her officers, and why it's important from that perspective.
Thank you. And thank you for allowing me to be here today. Really, our journey in Roseville started back in 2016, following the death of Philando Castile. We had a number of community meetings just because we were so close to where the incident happened. And what we heard over and over again from community members is the trust was being eroded by these types of traffic stops where people were being stopped for a minor equipment violation. And we heard about the fear that not only it instilled in the person being stopped, but their family members, the parents, grandparents. And it was hard after hearing that to not realize we need to do something different. And so back in 2016, we made it a priority in Roseville that we wanted our officers to be focused on the things that people did care about, the concerns that the community was telling us they were concerned about. And that is speeding, that is distracted driving, that is driving under the influence. These are the things that were eroding our public safety. And so we pushed out a directive that we wanted officers to focus on moving violations and the type of driving conduct that was impacting our community and that they were concerned about. We started also collecting data at that time. And in 2017, the first year we collected data, 80% of our traffic stops were for equipment were for moving violations. So the changes we made were the officers were listening. They were getting out there and they were enforcing things like speed and red lights and distracted driving and DWIs. Fast forward to 2021, and this was after I took over as chief, we were doing a major policy update of our entire policy manual, and we decided it was important enough that we needed to put this in our policy. Before it had just been a directive. And so we put it in our policy manual that directed our officers to focus on moving violations and absent some type of public safety risk or some other issue, we just were not going to enforce minor equipment violations that did not impact our roadway safety. So that was put in place, and that was about the same time that the county attorney was bringing forward this initiative. Fast forward another couple of years, and that's when we built out this alternative. The alternative basically works when the officer's in their squad car and they see one of these minor equipment violations that, quite frankly, most of the time people have no idea. They don't know that their tail light is no longer working or whatever light might be out. The officer quick logs the license plate, enters it into their computer. Thanks to the county attorney, we were able to build a program that really automated everything. So it automates the officer's location. It takes the officer about 20 seconds to enter that information, and then they just do it through a drop down, letting or selecting what the violation is, like a headlight out. That's all the officer has to do. So it's freeing up their time that now they can go spend time enforcing things like distracted driving that we know impacts roadway safety. The rest of it is all behind the scenes on the clerical side. A letter gets mailed out to that person, letting them know on this date, at this time, at this location, we observed that you had a taillight out. And then, by the way, if you need some help getting that taillight fixed, stop by the police department and we've got a voucher to help you out. I cannot tell you the overwhelming response that we've received from people that have received that letter. People say, I had no idea. Some people don't have the means to be able to get that $200 headlight fixed, so being able to come get that voucher means the world to them. So just I pulled the numbers today. We've done about 2,000 letters since the program started. We don't always track how many vouchers we've given out, but it has, everyone that's come into the police department that has gotten one of these letters is so appreciative. And I think as we talk to members of our community, it is building that trust back up. So for us, it's really worked well and something that we're going to continue to focus on. And as it was mentioned, this frees up time for our officers to focus on what our community really cares about. And right now, that's violent crime. We're worried about, and we want our officers focused on the parts of our community that need improving, that we need to tackle some of the, whether it's theft, whether it's violent crime. We're not going to do that by chasing taillights. We're going to be doing that by getting out in these communities, building that trust, and working together with our community to drive down some of these crime rates that our community is concerned about.
Thanks, Chief Scheider. Jared, I think you're going to focus on research. That's what you do.
Well, thank you. Whoa. Thank you for having me here. My introduction to this issue started about 1,900 miles away from here in Charleston, South Carolina, with the murder of a man named Walter Scott. Walter Scott was pulled over for a broken taillight, and about 2 minutes later, he was dead with 5 shots to his back. At the time, I was a federal prosecutor at the U.S. Department of Justice, and my responsibility was investigating cases of police misconduct, hate crimes, and human trafficking. We successfully prosecuted the officer for murder in that case, and he received one of the longest sentences ever for the killing of a civilian. But as I was standing on the courthouse steps after that victory, I felt empty. Because I knew even with that prosecution, Walter Scott wasn't coming back, and I knew that the next day, the policies and procedures that had given rise to his death were still going to be in effect. And when you feel that bad after what was arguably the biggest victory in my career, it meant that I needed to go get a new job. I didn't know what that was, but I knew that I wanted to begin working and helping people and communities that were trying to fix some of these problems come with solutions. So shortly thereafter, I received a phone call from the prosecutor down in Charleston, South Carolina, who had been collecting a lot of data on the decisions that were happening inside the criminal legal system in Charleston, South Carolina. And she said to me, do you think we can use data to ensure that my office is being fair? Do you think that we could use data to figure out if our law enforcement is being effective? And I said, I don't know, but I sure want to try to help you find out. There was only one problem, that I didn't know anything about data. And so I went towards building a team of people who knew a little bit about data scientists and policy makers, and people who could crunch numbers to try to answer this question. What I've come to learn since starting Justice Innovation Lab in 2020 is that data is pretty simple, that really it's all about counting. But in order for data to matter, 2 things need to be true. Number 1, we need to have reliable information. We need to be able to trust that the numbers are accurately reflecting what we care about. And number two, data only matters if we count the right things. I started my career at the US State Department, where I was working on rule of law issues in post-war countries, and I was working in Iraq, and that was one of the first times I had ever heard about metrics. At that time, we were trying to measure whether or not we had achieved the rule of law. And the metric that we were using was the number of courthouses that had been built. Now, I'm sure for all of you who know anything about the rule of law, you would probably agree with me that the number of courthouses built doesn't actually equal justice. So what should we be counting? I think we need to be counting the things that truly show whether or not we are being fair and whether or not we are being effective. Are the actions of our law enforcement achieving our goals? Historically, in the justice system, we've measured two things, which is the percentage of people that we convict and the amount of time that we sentence them to incarceration. And I have come to believe, after about 20 years in this system, that that's about as useful of an information as the number of courthouses that we have built. When John Choi and Ramsey County and the police departments here decided that they were going to try a new policy and they were going to measure whether or not they were being fair and effective, clearly we could look at things like, were these traffic stops leading to the seized weapons that the policy was designed to improve? And the answer was no. Less than 2% of the times it was yielding that. Was it being fairly executed? No. As John mentioned, black drivers were 4 times more likely to be pulled over, 9 times more likely to be searched. And John and the team here in Ramsey County decided to do something different. But one of the things that I think is most important when we are counting the right things, when we are measuring the right things, is that we approach this change, these pivots, with what we call a hypothesis mindset. Now, a hypothesis is an idea that can be tested. That's it. Scientists have been using it for generations, and the idea here in Ramsey County was, can we stop doing this thing that we believe is unequal, that we believe is ineffective, and can we make a difference? Now, what I like about hypotheses as opposed to theories or opinions is that we can test them. And it allows us to bring different people to the table who have different ideas. So when we work in places, people have different ideas and we can test them. And what we tested in Ramsey County was that you could end this practice without demonstrably reducing public safety in the community. And so as Justice Innovation Lab is doing work around the country, we are looking for the people, for the communities that are willing to try something different, that are willing to bring that hypothesis mindset to the table, that are willing to bring their data to the table so that we can actually count the right things. And where we have seen that happen, we've seen these harms reduce. We've seen the reduction. In Ramsey County, in the year that we studied, about 5,300 fewer people were stopped by the police. And we know that these traffic stops are incredibly dangerous. Around the country since 2017, over 700 people have been killed during a traffic stop. So why would we not try to do something different? But it's not just traffic stops. We're using this in communities across the country, including in Charleston, South Carolina, where they are using this approach to identify cases that should not be in the system and remove those cases from the system quickly. What we have seen from our research there is that in the year that we have worked there, over 200 people have been removed from the criminal legal system who did not need to be there. They have sped up the time to resolve these cases, and the people who are getting those cases resolved quickly are less likely to wind back up in the system, improving public safety in Charleston and beyond. And so what we are always looking for is, where are the communities that are willing to try something different? For those of us who've been in the fight for a more just country for a long time, one thing can be really intimidating. We often talk about the American criminal justice system as if it were just a singular thing. It is not. In America, we have over 15,000 court systems, over 18,000 law enforcement agencies, and if you want to fix justice in this country, we got to fix all of them. And that's particularly scary. If you guys are just worried about your community, that's a lot more people out there that I'm worried about. But what I've also come to realize is that each of those communities are actually incubators of change. Any one of those communities can try something different. And so when Ramsey County wants to try something different, and they've got the data to measure it, and they've got some hypothesis, Justice Innovation Lab will be there to try to help you measure it. We think that change and innovation is coming from the communities, and we're looking for those places that want to try something different, because as we have seen around the country, I mean, we recently wrote a law review article, which, I'm not sure how many of you guys read law review articles, not many people do, but it's one of the most read law review articles in the country right now, looking at Ramsey County and what's happening there. Our team recently testified in Chicago about the results in Ramsey County because they are considering new changes to their policing and traffic stop policy. We're speaking to the police departments in Las Vegas because they are looking to Ramsey County as a way and a path forward. So we believe that research and building the evidence base of what a more just and effective system could look like is vital to improving not only individual communities, but our country as a whole.
Thanks, Jared. Which is, by the way, why the Justice Research Center exists. And I don't think Jared would disagree that there's plenty of work for all of us to be doing on this. Thanks, Jared. We've got about 15 minutes or so for questions. I don't know if we have anybody. Oh, there's a microphone there. Thanks, Jermaine.
Thank you. I have a question. First of all, thank you for being here. This was eye-opening for me. I think I have made a lot of assumptions about what non-public safety traffic stops are. My name is Mari. I'm a principal in Minneapolis, Minnesota, high school principal. I was in St. Paul this weekend, and I saw a traffic stop for speeding, and it made me realize that I can't remember when the last time I saw a traffic stop in my city, even for public safety concerns. I also married into the Minneapolis Police Department, and so I feel like I have a little bit of an intimate insight there as well. I'm wondering if you have any hope for Minneapolis to possibly get to where you all have gotten to, and if so, what does that hope look like?
Anyone want to speak for Minneapolis?
That's a really hard question to answer just because I'm not Minneapolis. I'm not necessarily connected to that community, but I think Minneapolis there's a lot of issues going on. I mean, one of which is that I don't think there's enough police officers. And the question is, like, what is enough? I don't know what the answer is, but clearly I think that there are a number of issues about the ability to solve crimes and to work on some of these partnerships. If you don't have the people to do that and you're always behind, or it feels like you're trying to drink from a fire hose, I think those are going to be some of the issues about trying to also make the change, because you're just constantly responding to one thing after another, and it doesn't give you that capacity, I think, to maybe be intentional about that. I mean, there's a question about what is enough, and that's really up for the community to decide. But I have the sense that people in Minneapolis are sensing that maybe there needs to be some ability to recruit and retain more people. I think the policymakers are recognizing that. They've changed the salaries, and et cetera, and hopefully that can provide some relief. But at the end of the day, I do think that what we were able to do here in Ramsey County is about the relationships and the trust and being able to roll something out. This took a long time, and in fact, one of my first conversations with many of the leaders was the answer was no way could we ever do this. But we just kept talking about it, and we kept focusing on the data and recognizing, the definition of insanity is to do things over and over the same way and expect a different outcome. And as Jared talked about, if you want to be innovative, want to incubate change, we've got to create those conditions to make the change. And so, the public safety that we have in Ramsey County is connected to what is in Hennepin County. So we're all in this together. And I am a strong champion and proponent that when we work with community, listen to the perspectives, and try to do things differently for that better outcome, which is a better quality of justice, a better quality of policing. That's what we should be aiming for. And we're all in it together, and we'll be doing everything that we can to work with anybody in the state of Minnesota or anybody across the country. That answered your question, but that was a hard question to answer. I do have hope, because I believe that as long as the public and the community are really engaged around what is public safety, and they're listening, they're giving grace. We heard about that at the previous conversation, right? Because I think that there's some truth to this. Sometimes I think the movement towards a more progressive justice place, it's become, you're either right or you're wrong. It's black or white, it's either or, and we gotta get to the and, right? We can do a lot of different things, and we have to start thinking that collaboration and relationships is the key, I think, to moving some of these things forward, and listening with an open heart, and listening to those who are most impacted by all of this, by the violence, most impacted by the justice system. And when we can get to that place, we will do better. We will all do better.
Do we have other questions? Over here.
It's very peaceful by this waterfall.
Hello, how are you guys doing up there?
Great.
Doing great.
Great.
Well, I have a question. My question is about the Lights On program. I think it's a very outstanding program. But do you have to be a resident of Ramsey County? Because, you know, some days I'm a good driver, and some days, you know, like today, I might go down the wrong street if I'm in a rush. So I'm just wondering, if I did get pulled over by the officers and they found out I didn't have a headlight, and I did get that letter, I can come into, I'm a Minneapolis resident. Love Minneapolis, born and raised North Minneapolis, love it. Love it, love it, love it. Yes, our police department has a lot of issues. However, the world has a lot of issues. And we need to quit trying to fix things and come up with some solutions. You know, you can't fix a system that was made broken when they made it. But you can come up with solutions. As you talked about grace, you talked about all those other things. But going back to my original question was, if I do get a ticket and I get that letter and it comes from Ramsey County and I live in Minneapolis, Hennepin County, do I go to Ramsey County to get my voucher, or do I go to the 4th precinct and talk to him?
So with the program we have in Ramsey County, you can go to either, when we send out the letter, you can come pick it up at the Roseville Police Department, Maplewood, or St. Paul. It's not being offered right now in other counties. One of the things that we did kind of a pilot on a couple weeks ago is we did a drive-through car check. And it was open to anybody. So you could have been from, we didn't check IDs or ask where you were from. And we just set it up in a church parking lot, and we had about 60 people come. I have no idea where they were from, but they just came, they drove through, they suspected they had a light out, or they knew they had a light out, and we just handed out vouchers. It was a really successful program, so we're working with Lights On to increase those. So rather than waiting for an officer to observe the violation, let's be proactive and give people a place to come, drive through. If they've got a light out, we just hand out that voucher right on scene. So watch, I know St. Paul also hosted a similar event, and just given the success we've seen, I anticipate those will continue, and hopefully other agencies will start offering them as well.
And Chief Scheider, just to be clear, if I'm a Minneapolis resident, if I'm driving through Roseville and I'll get this letter too, I can come pick up the voucher and use it wherever the nearest Lights On vendor is, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep, and there's a number of service stations throughout the entire metro area, so.
See, and I just want to add one more thing about the Lights On program. There's been an evolution about it. So it was started by Don Samuels through microgrants after Philando Castile. And the model at that time was that officers would pull over somebody, and then as a part of, instead of giving them a ticket, they would give them this voucher to fix this, the defect. So it may be a brake light out or whatever it might be. The organization microgrants as well as policing have now come, I think in Ramsey County, at least for the participating jurisdictions, they've listened to community. And they realize too that in many instances, especially for black and brown communities, being pulled over is a very traumatic type of situation, right? And so instead of the officer, being in a position of giving out this coupon as a part of a traffic stop, the alternative that we have built out is to allow for somebody to just put the information 20 seconds into the CAD system. The next day you'll get a letter instead of that. And that has been very well received by people, that we are recognizing that moment and that issue of, and trying to do something differently. And I'm really glad and thankful for the Lights On program to evolve that way, and also for our police leaders to evolve that way, because our chief in St. Paul, Chief Axel Henry, he is now a strong proponent of this, but he talks about this in a very passionate way. He said, we used to think that pulling somebody over and giving them a coupon, it makes the officer feel good, but it may not ultimately make the person that we are serving feel good, right? And so he's very much embraced this notion that we try to mail the letter out, because it's not about how the officer feels, it's about how the community feels.
I think we have time for one real quick question. We got one back there.
Hi there. My question's evolved a little because y'all have kept going on this, but we touched on it initially in regards to the recruitment and retention question. I think we all know that everyone across the country is hurting from a staffing perspective and has been. And so is this maybe something from a research and a data perspective that now lends itself to show there is a way to reimagine policing, and there is a way for us to deal with the staffing challenges that we have by thinking about how we deploy our resources in a different way and satisfy what the community is asking for?
Yeah, I mean, we looked at something similar down in South Carolina, and we surveyed all of the prosecutors, and we gave them a list of 50 charges that were the most common things that would come across their desk. And we showed them, they got to rank them, and it came out like most people would expect. Murder, sexual assaults, armed robberies at the top, traffic offenses, drug possession at the bottom. And then what we were able to do was to contrast that with what was actually happening in their system, who was arrested and who was being incarcerated. And quite quickly, people began to see, wait, actually, most of these cases in our system are these lower priority cases. They're resulting in a remarkable amount of incarceration. And at the same time, their prosecutors were dealing with case backlogs that were preventing them from solving their most serious crimes. I mean, the same thing we are seeing across the country is that the way we've been doing business is actually just a major misallocation of our resources and a major misprioritization. It's hard for people to see that sometimes. It's hard for people to realize that because people are drinking out of a fire hose. We're seeing prosecutors' offices around the country understaffed. We're seeing police departments under the country's understaffed. We're asking people to do things that they are not equipped to do. And so I think it is harder to find officers and prosecutors to do these jobs, but we need them. So for me, what I think a lot of communities need to do is to take this accounting and to really almost do an audit of how we are using our resources. Because when you ask people, most of the prosecutors I often ask, how many of the cases that you're seeing in your system are actually the byproducts of mental health, substance use, and poverty? And the number that I hear as estimates is usually 40 to 60%, right? Over half of the cases that are entering our system are really something that are caused by something else. But what are we doing? We're spending lots and lots of money incarcerating people. We're spending lots of money on utilizing similar law enforcement tactics. And so I think what is going to be really crucial for communities is to do a real accounting of where their priorities are misaligned with how they are actually acting every day, because that is what I am seeing is shifting communities and governments to try something different.
Chief Scheider, do you want to add anything from a law enforcement perspective?
I would just echo that, we need to align our resources where the priorities of the community are. And in our community, we heard that loud and clear all the way back to 2016. People aren't concerned about taillights out, headlights out. They're concerned about the moving violations, the aggressive driving, and violent crime. And so we don't have enough officers. So we should be investing our resources with what the needs of the community are.
Great. Well, I think our next item is lunch, so we should let you go, and panelists will be around, I think. Thanks, everybody, for learning about what we're doing in Ramsey County.